Greetings, fellow classmates from Wilmette Institute. This is from our unit answers to the questions from units 1, 2, and 3, mostly 1 and 2. We have some 7 and 4 valleys here. But there are 2 topics from Unit 1 and Unit 2 I wanted to answer questions for. For those of you interested in research citations, working on your master's doctorate, I also want to introduce our project. If you're new, our past class members from the last 2 classes are aware that I've been working on this, what's called the Mihdi Project, which is an artificial intelligence machine learning project that is designed to help scholars and assist with any of our needs in terms of research and scholarship. But it also has a lot of other core competencies that can help if you are doing either study of the scriptures, any kind of even personal growth and development, studying the writings, etc. And we're using this tool to help with both individual and institutional studies of all of the scriptures, not just the Baha'i writings. But so I'll give you a little more of this at the end. This is really the answer to the Unit 1 and 2 questions. And I've taken 2 from the Llama, Rashi Llama, from the 7 and 4 valleys, from hid words. And 2 of the questions I'm answering for Unit 1 and Unit 2, we'll get a little into 7 and 4 valleys, but we'll do separate ones on Unit 3 and 4. But this is for Unit 1 and 2, which are the 2 terms or issues that we're researching and answering. The questions are, the first question was about the word crimson, and the second was that we're answering for Unit 1, Unit 2 are about the use of metaphor within the writings, the Baha'i writings, and really in all scriptures. So we actually use the Mihdi Project. It's in beta state. It's an artificial intelligence program. We've used this program as well as compared it to the other ones out there that are really, the ones that you know about, like GPT-4, Bert, Alpaca, Vicuna, Llama, all the other dozen or so other systems. Mihdi is a machine learning program that we actually have programmed with 1,000 each of the Baha'i writings, 750 world religions, tradition and indigenous scriptures, secondary texts, etc. And that's our main corpus of the database. And so we basically updated all the other engines that have been done up through 2021, and have all those scriptures now, thousands of pages in the database that have trained this particular model, the Mihdi model. So it does everything the other. It has the corpus. It's really been fine-tuned, so it has all the other documents and scriptures, but then it also uses all the previous large language models, LLMs. To give you an example here of the other ones, this is a combination. It says in the Baha'i faith, this is for crimson. Crimson is often associated with martyrdom and sacrifice. It symbolizes the blood shed by the early followers of the Baha'i faith who faced persecution and gave their lives for their beliefs. The color crimson is used to honor and remember these individuals and their sacrifices. It is also seen as a symbol of courage, steadfastness, and a dedication to the principles of the Baha'i faith. And then specifically I asked those dozen LLMs that we all know about, GPT, Bard, Alpaca, etc., from our partnerships with Maggie, which is, we have partnerships going with different universities, with nonprofits like the Club of Rome type nonprofit, but these nonprofits are really the Santa Fe Institute and others that are working on social modeling and scripture. But we also asked it, where is it explicitly mentioned in the Baha'i faith? And every one of them said it is not explicitly mentioned, or it is not mentioned often, or basically they couldn't find crimson. And then I expanded it to red because the Persian word and the Arabic word are both red and crimson. It's not as definitive as it is in Hebrew and Greek, so and the etymology part of it. But it's interesting because it says it's not specifically mentioned. However, it's symbolically associated with sacrifice. So, which is it's fascinating, but that it saw that much but didn't see anything any further from there. So um, that's just what's fascinating is that when you look at our database of the word crimson and then the word red, also the database of the Torah, the Zohar, the Bible, and the Quran, as well as Baha'i Writings, our Mihdi comes up with over 55 references to the word crimson and many more, dozens for the word red, but for crimson, it's got 2 in the Akdas, 5 in Epistle, 3 in Gleanings, 1 in Hidden Words, 1 in the Ikavikan, Prayers and Meditations, 3, Tablets of Baha'u'llah, 12. Anyway, there are over 55 references to crimson. And then when you use the pull-down menu to ask Mihdi, we have what's called it's a type of search where it's called prompt engineering, and it's an API, which is just basically a pull-down menu. And what you can do with it is you can look at the references according to different filters and say, I only want Baha'u'llah, I only want this word, etc. And then you can go to the etymology side and it'll show you the Arabic Persian behind that word. And that's based on a database actually from Iran, as well as a number of known databases of Arabic and Persian, which you can show you kind of. If you have any questions, we can give updates on that. But of those 55 references to crimson, we also asked for phrases, and the main phrases are crimson arc, crimson spot, crimson pillar, crimson light, crimson hill, crimson book, crimson ink, crimson cloud, crimson tree, and the crimson city of God. These are ones that the database, the AI came up with from the database of all the Baha'i writings, in addition to this secondary text. We also have the Tao Te Ching and many other texts here, both scriptural and in terms of indigenous or local and secondary texts, as well as traditions in addition to religions. So if you look at those backgrounds and then the etymology, it's very interesting because the root words were gen, G-N-E, and where, W-R. Those are, if you know Arabic and Persian, there are roots which are even stronger than the etymology of English, where it goes into many branches. But one fascinating thing about crimson is that it has very similar roots both in Arabic and Persian, which is unusual because one is obviously Indo-European and the other one goes back to the Hebrew, but in the Sanskrit. But there are many, many references to this as you get into the 2 root words, which include, of course, the original insect or worm that the crimson color was used in dyes for. That goes back all the languages and all of the scriptures. But then you have other colors like kermes, carmine, crimson, and red. And the semiotics, or the symbology of those, include death, kingship, of course, cloth, because they use it as a dye for cloth, rose, the word rose, and the Persian Hermes, as Dr. Rob mentioned, Hermes is very similar to the Arabic, which is unusual because they came from very different lines of etymology. They both do mean red or dark red or purplish red. And there's also an entire article which has been scraped by the other AIs on Wikipedia called Crimson. So you can look up, it's mostly the chemistry of it, of course, it's Wikipedia. So they have a lot of stuff about that in terms of the different types of species of insects that were used throughout history. It also means, if you go down the Persian etymology, to turn or to bend, wealth and richness, king, speaking with belief. And the word word and the word speech, in fact, come out from the gene, as well as the where, W-R root, passing through red fire of tests, believing to be true, And then it's fascinating because to speak and to speak words and to speak of objects of value also are behind that. So it's amazing how this crimson has so many. And this is what's interesting about meditation, prayer, study of the writings, and we'll get that into that in a second on the metaphor idea. But it's wonderful to be able to have tools that we can really look deeply at the etymology. And we also have the Shoghi Effendi's original encyclopedic entries, which are from the Guardian's own 1935 edition of Webster's International. We're digitizing it. We've gotten permission to digitize the Guardian's basic encyclopedic dictionary he used for all his translations, as well as the etymologies. And of course, we have the whole English etymology from that dictionary and thesaurus and etymological source. It's over 1,000 pages. We can put a picture up of it, but it's so huge you can hardly lift it. But having digitized that, we of course went through the etymology of that, which in English, which came from, of course, the same worm or insect, or basically the source of the color red and crimson that was used in all of the various cloths and dyes, etc. But then it also gets into all of the English uses of the words in metaphor, like we just went over with belief, truth, etc. And so that gives us kind of a background of the many ways it's used throughout the writings. But also, if you expand that search on Mihdi to include the other the other prompts for the other religions, then there are many other there are what they call hermeneutics in the Bible, a study of the scripture, and it's really semiotics, what are not only the words that are used, but also the signs. And there's another language for communicating with God, and that's the whole thing of semiotics and hermeneutics, where in all of the scriptures we get into metaphor, not just the words themselves. And we've looked at the etymology going down there, but in terms of meditation and study, as well as scholarly journals and citations, which this will give you citations for all the world religions with the reference and the page and the citation. So it's a massive database source, and the previous models didn't do that because they just scraped the internet and you'd have to be a developer to see their sources. So what we've done is we have in our prompt engineering, we have models that actually will show you all the sources of reference and the page numbers. And that's true of all of these other references that we just went through with the Epistles of the Son of the Wolf, Hidden Words, and all that. All these have the references, which we can get into if you're interested. I don't want to make this 3 hours long for an answer to 3 questions, but it is a great tool if you want to use it. And there'll be more on that. We'll post some more things if you are interested in that side, but this isn't an AI course. We're talking about the scriptures. So in the Bible, crimson, as well as there are, of course, Hebrew and Greek, and there are over 60 references to both crimson and red if you look at Remez from the red side or Odem, and they refer to, it's fascinating to look at the Bible side of it. The Zohar basically says there's only 3 or 4. It's a huge book, but it has 3 or 4 references, the predecessor or the mystical side of the Talmud. In the Torah, well, it actually quotes the Torah of saying, Dr. Rob mentioned that worship and communication started with sacrifice. You go back that far into the Zohar and the Torah and those early things, and you're going to find a lot of blood because it was sacrificed of animals in worship. And Dr. Rob explained how then, they sold it and helped support the temple. in the Torah and in the Zohar, it says the crimson cow or the red heifer is the only path in the first step to the unity with God. Now the Zohar is like, the Persian mystics. It's all about, excuse me, the unity with God. And it starts out with the Zohar, how every term refers back to unity with God. So every redness in, Baha'u'llah says redness is the blood of the martyrs in one place. In another, in 7 and 4, as we get into it, the crimson redness, he mentions redness 3 or 4 times also, and there's many, there's over 100 references to redness as a crimson or purple red in terms of many other meanings. But in the Bible, in the Zohar, in the Torah, in the Quran, it's mentioned 3 times in a different sense. But in the Bible, it means wrath, it means fire, divine power, worship, lordship, love, many times blood, of course. It also is in eschatology, the time of the end. You'll see the red of fire and the wrath of fire. And in the Quran, it's the same thing. It's eschatological. It's at the time of the end, the messianic message of when Christ returns, when Muhammad returns, the sky will turn red. The time of the ends, I don't know, it was atomic war, whatever it is, but it's, the wrath of fire is part of that crimson and red. It symbolizes holiness and forgiveness. And of course, most importantly, love and the love of God. And it's, Baha'u'llah refers to it. Let me see if I can find this quote. This goes back to more Unit 3 than Unit 1 and 2. It's interesting because the 3 mentions in the Quran are to the 3 things we studied, the Llama and the 7 and 4 valleys. And so it's incredible that the Quran has those 3 that we've just studied. And then the suffering, of course, the suffering and manifestation. And red is mentioned and crimson are mentioned by the Guardian many times in God Passes By about the sufferings of Bahai and torturing with red-hot irons and pinchers and the tortures of the Bahai. So red is a painful thing. Symbolically, metaphorically, Baha'u'llah says in our other study, Unit 3, love hath bound a myriad victims in its fetters and pierced a myriad wise men with its arrow. Know that every redness thou seest in the world is from its wrath. This is, red, wrath, the wrath of, in this case, it was previously translated, and we have the older editions of all these books, and Mihdi first came up with the wrath of God from a previous translation of 7 and 4 valleys, which is completely different than this, and you'll find that in these writings if you do research on it, that sometimes they're very different, but the current authorized translation of 7 and 4, it says that every redness thou seest in the world is from its wrath, and he's referring to love there. I'm not interpreting this, I'm just giving you the syllogism of that paragraph, so you can look at it yourself and decide what it means. And then it says every paleness in men's cheek is from its poison. So he's talking about how terrible love is, how it destroys everything, the pain, the agony, the blood, the destruction. This is crimson blood, martyrdom, it's pain, suffering, courage, all that stuff. But then he says it yieldeth no remedy but death, and walketh not save in the valley of extinction. So you can't get much worse than that kind of red and crimson. And he ends that paragraph, of course, in 7 and 4 by saying, yet sweeter than honey is its venom upon the lover's lips, and fair its deadly sting in the seeker's sight than 100,000 lives. So this is, again, we're using Baha'u'llah's using metaphor throughout all the writings to give much deeper meanings that cannot really be grasped necessary by language. And this is another thing about semiotics, because communicating with God is not just in words. It is in prayer and meditation, but look at, we're dealing with a color here, right? And there's the semiotics of color in all of the scriptures, and of art and of beauty. And that's our whole graphic, our schematic engine here, is that we're recommending that as we translate and as we do more things, Ruhi classes, whatever, we have more diagrams, we have more illustrations, we have more charts and graphs and breakdowns. It's like it's easier to study and learn when we go back and look at a picture of it. And in semiotics and hermeneutics, these words are very important. Crimson, we're talking about colors. What is the metaphor of colors in general in the scriptures? It's a way of communicating with God because it has so many different meanings. It has so many meanings on it. And as we discussed in the Zoom, we're talking about multidimensional realities, and we're living in a lower constrained framed dimension. So to understand what's going on in that next world and what the ideal forms are, that's the Neoplatonic and Platonic metaphor, the idea that we need these symbols to see what's going on with the names and attributes of God in the other world that's being reflected here, and the color and the art, and those are other ways of communicating with God and understanding what God's trying to say to us as well. And in fact, it's interesting, because both Mihdi and all the other engines say that metaphor used in scripture is for enhancing understanding. Metaphors help to convey complex or abstract ideas in more relatable and understandable manners. Okay, this is how we relate, from my standpoint, from one dimension to another, or to many, by using familiar images or comparisons. Similes and metaphor make it easier for readers to grasp the intended meaning of the text. That's fairly obvious. Engaging the imagination. Metaphors stimulate the imagination and evoke emotions, allowing readers to connect with the text on a deeper level. They create vivid mental images that can have a lasting impact and help to make the message more memorable. That's pretty insightful. It's interesting because it's touching the heart. You know, crimson is love. Love is about the heart. Heart is about sacrifice and detachment. The blood of the martyrs. Every red is the blood of the martyrs. Every red is the love of God, the master says. So there's hundreds of these quotes. I don't have time to give all the quotes that Mihdi came up with, but they're wonderful. So that the other one is conveying spiritual truth. Scripture often deals with profound spiritual concepts that are impossible to express directly. See, isn't that cool? That's the idea of semiotics. We use signs and symbols and colors and things that touch the heart in addition to the words. And metaphors, of course, are in words, but when we're using words about color, etc., or showing pictures, graphs, illustrations, and creating beautiful pictures with poetry as the manifestation, and all the manifestations have used metaphor tremendously because they're talking about the other world. And it says, impossible to express directly, metaphors provide a way to communicate these truths symbolically, allowing readers to explore and contemplate the deeper meanings behind each of the words. And this is the whole idea of translating, looking at semiotics, looking at the etymology. If there's 72 meanings in every one, it's wonderful to go back and look historically, semiotically, and that's the other point, which is encouraging personal exploration, meditation, and interpretation. Metaphors in Scripture invite personal integration, reflection. They allow individuals to apply the text to their own lives and experiences, fostering a deeper engagement with the message and encouraging personal growth. That's an important part of the use of these tools. AI is just a tool, but it can also help in not only personal study, journal entries and articles and discussion and consultation with our teams and our friends and our communities, but it can also be a foundation for public discourse and very important things, not only in personal growth, but, for example, we have a whole project in our nonprofit going on nuclear de-escalation and how our communication signals misinterpreted not only by humans but by AI and some of the dangers there. And then Dr. Rob will love this one, preserving cultural and historical contexts. Metaphors used in Scripture often reflect the culture and historical context in which they were written. By understanding the metaphors, reader can gain insight into the beliefs, values, and practices of the time, helping to interpret texts much more accurately. Overall, metaphors in Scripture serve as powerful tools for communication, engagement, interpretation, enabling readers to connect with the text on multiple levels and uncover deep spiritual truths. So that's both Mihdi and then combining the Baha'i writings and scriptures. That's kind of a couple answers to the units with 7 and 4 valleys. There are many other references in the writings to red in terms of going back to the Hebrew and then how the Sanskrit ties back to the Arabic. In the Hebrew words, it's Adam, Chakali, and Sur, and then Purazo and Puros. And those, of course, get back to pyro, like, pyrotechnology, which is fire. So it's all the fire and the burning of the side of the red, and that's in the Hebrew. And this is going back to the Talmud and the Torah. Also Suf, which is the Red Sea, and that gets back into, it's not just crimson, but red, geography and the history. And then in other parts of the writings, there's 3 references to the Quran. One is when the wife, when the world will be burdened with sin, the sky will turn bright red, and then there's 3 or 4 that came up through the Mihdi Project in the Quran also, although we'd have to probably do some deeper because we're still adding databases to the Quran from the Quran. Currently, what's really interesting in the Quran is that it, as I mentioned, it does hit on Amma as well as what we discussed with Gog and Magog, because in the gap between the mountains for Gog and Magog was used the word crimson and red to melt down in the Quran the references to that particular tablet we discussed with Gog and Magog, and also with Amma, it's the second crimson reference in the Quran was to the clouds of rain, the redness in the clouds of rain. And then the other one was the eschatological end of days, the wrath and the destruction and the death that were also in the Quran. So I have the individual surahs noted. It's the Mihdi came up with that. I don't know that anyone is interested in if you're interested in the Quran, there are very specific references to each one. For instance, the Gog and Magog, bring me blocks of iron when he had filled up the gap between the mountains. This is separating, of course. That's in Al-Kaf, 1896. And then, how horrible will it be when the heavens will split open, becoming rose red like burnt oil? Of course, roses are usually a beautiful symbol. In this, it's the eschatology, and that's in Ar-Rahman 55:37. So anyway, I won't spend the hours going over all of the various references there in terms of the Quran, but the other references, there are probably another 100 or so references in all the other writings that came up, because we use the filters to say Baha'u'llah, but when you filter it, you also can get, you have those basic 50 or 60 references, but then you'll have another 150 where it was requoted by the Guardian in compilations, etc. So all those come up also. So you have to do some human sorting, some supervised learning with some of this. But in addition to 7 and 4 and all the other ones we mentioned, there are other references by Shoghi Effendi. There are many by Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha uses it for wine a lot, drunken with the red wine of thy love. So again, it goes back to love, but in this case, it's about the wine of reunion with God. And then there's an interesting one where it's in the recent tablets and citation. That's what's nice about Mihdi. It's up to date. Every pass it scrapes. The new tablets also, which the old models, if you ask the ones that are currently available, like Chat, they stop in 2021. These are update to like yesterday. So it shows in some of the new tablets, there's one just that has both red and crimson in it, which says God's God's lover have dyed the earth red with their crimson blood. So that's just a very recent tablet by Baha'u'llah that was translated. And then there's another one by the Bab. We don't have many in the Bab here because we haven't uploaded the Bayan, and we still have to get the rest of that. But this one that's recently translated that was just scraped, it says the red wine of knowledge. So we know a lot about love, but knowledge is important, and the Bab mentions knowledge also. So we'll cover more for more of you that are interested in using this in your own research, etc. We're making this available. We're working with the House and the NSA right now on what parts are going to be used by institution and what by individuals. And we have a bunch more Zooms that we have to meet on that. But a lot of it is going to be available to individual researchers, scholars, etc. As it comes together, whether it's by request or whether you have an API that's usable on the web or whatever, that's still to be determined. But essentially, that's kind of the first free units, and our video that gives some examples of how we can get into much deeper dives and rabbit holes with the assistance of some of these new tools. And I thank you for your time.